Thank you so much. I'll be very brief. We only have 10 minutes left in the session. It's my honor and pleasure to be here, and I think we saw 4 wonderful presentations. I wonder if we could give them one more hand. I find them very, they bring lots of thoughts to mind. Let me start with the last first, because it's the best of times and the worst of times. It may be, is it the worst of times for congregation, as Ehsan Bagby just pointed out, but it's the best of times for Muslim American civic organizations. This reminds us as historians and as scholars of philanthropy that when we look at religious philanthropy in the United States, we have to remember that Nancy Ammerman's claims about the congregation being the basic unit of religious communities in the United States does not always apply. Does not always apply. Some of the greatest Muslim creative activity, people doing things for the betterment of others, whether that be material or immaterial, right, happens oftentimes outside the mosque and even around the mosque, but not necessarily in the mosque, right? When I say around the mosque, what we know is that the networks of people in the mosque, somebody knows somebody, this brother knows that brother, this sister knows that sister, and amazing things are happening there all over. But that doesn't get cha-ching rung up in the weekly contributions to the mosque. So mosques remain vital, but they don't necessarily benefit from all of the remarkable Muslim philanthropic activity since 9/11. Our 3 presentations before that spoke to that activity and wanted to correct the common misconception that 9/11 had a dampening effect on Muslim American philanthropy. I think it's very important because Muslims are only 1 to maximum 2% of the U.S. population to understand the large social, political, economic, and cultural forces that shaped their philanthropy after 9/11. And I want to put a name to some of these trends because I think that lurking right under the surface of some of the social scientific theory here are very identifiable political trends in the United States, of which Muslims are a vital part. Okay. Muslims are a small number of Americans. Muslims after 9/11 had a big symbolic impact on the question of what it meant to be an American. What rights do Americans, all Americans have? What should the United States foreign policy be? What role should we play in philanthropic endeavors? Muslims became the symbolic bodies on whose backs some of the greatest questions about what it means to be an American were debated in the post-9/11 era. And so what happened was not simply that Muslim Americans responded to 9/11 by becoming more engaged. Whether they liked it or not, they were pulled in. They were pulled in. And they were pulled in, and one of the graphs up here showing helps me make my point. They were pulled in not by politically conservative evangelical religious organizations so much, or by the Republican Party. They were pulled in by mainline Protestant organizations and the Democratic Party. They were pulled in by the attempt to form a new liberal consensus, again, using the symbolic nature of Muslim Americans. Think about the kinds of opportunities that there were for all of us who do work in this, whether we are Muslim or not. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that were offered to us to engage Muslim American communities. I got my doctorate in the year 2000. My success is basically because of Osama bin Laden. I mean, there is no doubt. New funds were available to me in a way that never were. I became a Carnegie Scholar. The Carnegie Corporation of New York offered major money. The Middle East Partnership Initiative, hundreds of millions of dollars to have soccer for peace in Jordan, inevitably involving Muslim Americans and those who, like me, are engaged deeply with the community even before 9/11. Now, the price to pay for that liberal was oftentimes were the bodies of slain soldiers like Humayun Khan and Karim Khan. It is not an accident that Hillary Clinton's campaign asked Ghazala and Khizr Khan to give a talk right before she spoke. The ghost of 9/11 had inspired people like Karim Khan, no relation to Humayun Khan, to sign up to shed his body for the country. And by asking him to do that, by asking the parents to, and Ghazala, who testified later, who she couldn't even speak because she still was so deep, was in such deep mourning, has such deep grief. But on their bodies, because of the shed blood of their son, Hillary Clinton's campaign decided to lay a trap for the Republican candidate Donald Trump, who subsequently fell right into it and insulted the mother of a slain soldier. That are part of the price for the liberal consensus. But the presentations here speak to a different post-9/11 trend. This was not liberal, it was leftist. It was not reformist, it was radical or progressive. And what we see in case after case are what Brad Fulton was referring to, and I can't remember your term, but I'm going to use the buzzword today in the leftist community, intersectionality. The intersectionality of struggles. We have a new, a sort of a flowering, fluorescent left in the country, which includes Muslims, and the ultimate evidence, the struggle for LGBT rights, right? The women's issues, down the line, immigrant issues, First Amendment issues, all of these Muslims have become part of them. And one of the ultimate signs of that leftist move of Muslim American philanthropies in the United States was the Council of American Islamic Relations reaction to the Orlando shooting, the Orlando nightclub shooting. Compare, when you have a chance, how CARE reacted to that versus how most mainstream liberal-leaning Muslim leaders did. CARE took on homophobia directly. Many of mainstream Muslim leaders who were more socially conservative attempted to avoid it. This is also happening on the Israel-Palestine issue. Mainstream liberal organizations like the Islamic Society of North America remain silent on Palestine. Anytime you ask them a question about it, they won't say anything because they do not want to upset their liberal comrades. Okay. Those on the left, however, of the Muslim left, are unapologetic in expressing their solidarity with the Palestinians, and this includes using that to build relationships with civic organizations like the American Friends Service Committee, Jewish Voice for Peace, and other organizations that are working on the Palestine issue. So that's all the time I have, but those are the names and the labels that I would give to the kinds of trends that we heard discussed here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How about if we take 3 questions from the audience for our panel to answer before we conclude? We take them all at once. I will start with one of my own. There was brief mention of the criminalization of giving in the Muslim community in the United States, because you have laws that associate donors organizations which may themselves transfer some money to maybe a terrorist organization or a nationalist organization. Some laws allow the criminalization of the donor to that organization that he gave. officers were used against him was that he donated money to an organization that gave money to Palestinian organization that critical of Hamas. So even the public spirit can use to discredit individuals. So do you have any insights on that criminalization and whether it continues to have traction today or it just fell by the wayside at this people? Miss.
So thank you for all these thought-provoking presentations. I'm going to direct my question to Kambiz, but I think it's probably relevant to everyone. I'll come back to something I asked about this morning. To what extent now, as compared with the day after 9/11, the day before 9/11, roughly speaking, and even going back to, say, the 90s and then the 80s, because I think we did make the point that philanthropy has become a much more sort of problematized topic to think about anyway, whether it's Christian, Jewish, or whatever. But to what extent is the term even Muslim giving or Muslim philanthropy now transparent in the sense that everybody assumes that we know what we're talking about, everybody assumes that it's cognate to Jewish giving, Christian giving, and that it's just very easy to hold a conversation among people with different knowledge backgrounds about giving, about philanthropy, and assume that everybody thinks that these are somehow similar, the same, that they evoke the same kinds of responses in communities, or are we still involved in a conversation that's driving towards an understanding or appreciation that puts them on the same footing? I mean, I just don't think that the day after 9/11, 9/12, that people saw Muslim giving as the same kind of act or instinct or potential even as Jewish giving, Catholic giving, Baptist giving, whatever it was. And I wonder, is there a convergence at work? Or are we still traveling along parallel lines or diverging lines? But I think this is a really important kind of cognitive point to think about in terms of just the ethnography of the United States and the anthropology of giving.
Does anyone else have a question?
I have a related comment, maybe. Yeah, maybe related to Amy's comment about the people perceive Muslim giving to be the same kind of act. Right after 9/11, and this is rooted in kind of other structures of Islamic public discourse that well predate and antedate at 9/11. Islam's not a religion, right? It's a political agenda, right? So I think there were a lot of people across the political spectrum in the United States who were willing to buy into this notion that Muslims giving, they must be giving to Hamas, they must be giving to Al-Qaeda, they must be giving to, because first of all, after all, we know Islam is inherently violent. So if Muslims are giving to Muslim organizations, those organizations, in one way or another, probably have a violent agenda. When you combine that with what happened in 1979 and the fact that Islam first made the radar screen of most, U.S. Americans in the form of the Iranian Revolution, right? That's what they were seeing. They were seeing a revolution, and they were told that these people are militant, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think that makes a lot of sense. That people wouldn't understand Muslim giving to be religious giving, precisely because, as you were saying, Kambiz, you're coming from a pathologization of Islam. And what's the root of the pathology? It's violent and overly political. They still have a problem. They still haven't extirpated religion from politics. So of course we've got to really watch this giving in the name of religion, because we all know what their religion is about.
Thank you very much. Maybe go ahead and answer.
So thank you for those excellent questions. On the point of criminalization of Muslim giving, I think that ship has sailed and it's accepted now that there is forms of Muslim giving that will be criminalized, and a lot of the Muslim charities spend a lot of money. Actually, have begun to not hire law firms, but have in-house lawyers that could help them manage all of these things. So that's there, and it's becoming institutionalized. It's becoming institutionalized both in the Department of Treasury and in large American Muslim charities that somehow we need to worry about giving being associated with crime, and that we need to read the law carefully to make sure that we're tracking the line properly. And I think this is one of the things that, to Edward's point, that we often forget, that these changes don't just apply to Muslims, they apply to charities across the board now. It's not just Muslim charities that have to do these things. Everybody has to do them, and we don't talk enough about that this sort of secularization of charitable giving has had a widespread effect, and we're not sure exactly what the consequences of it are going to be in the United States as a whole. So job security for the philanthropy school. In terms of whether Muslim giving, Jewish giving, and Christian giving are cognates with one another, I think after 9/11, here I have to speak sort of anecdotally and sort of following the literature on this stuff, that there was a general sense, as Scott said, that religion and politics are one and the same in the Islamic tradition, so that when Muslims give, unlike Christians, they can't be sure that this is going to a religious purpose, and that it could go to a religious purpose or it could go to a political purpose, because Islam never made that distinction properly, and it doesn't expect its charities to make that distinction. Muslims don't expect their charities to make that distinction. And I think that was pretty widely accepted among non-Muslims who worked on this material, or even in the general public when they thought about this, that made a lot of sense. And that, so they, the Treasury Department hired experts in Islamic finance. A professor from Rice University went into the Treasury Department, and they still have those positions to help them understand what it is Muslims do with money, because somehow it's different from what other people do with things with money. But I don't think we actually know the degree to which these are cognates, because the way in which we think about charity in the United States is based on a sort of a Christian notion that it's an expression of an inward sense of some transcendent being that makes us be loving and caring and charitable towards others. And for most Muslims, yes, that's there, but it's also a duty. It's a religious duty of sorts. Because of that, charitable giving takes on a variety of forms. It's not just that. It's not always voluntary. It's not always. What we do see is a sort of a convergence at points and divergences at other points. So we do see is that American Muslim charities are beginning to try to look more like other charities. They're going to Katrina, being ready to deal with natural disasters and things of that sort, in the way in which they see the Salvation Army or the Red Cross and other groups dealing with these things, and also joining these coalitions that I think helps to professionalize them in particular ways in American philanthropy. And on the other hand, we see other organizations like Iman and other local organizations that try to pave their own path because they have much more money accessible to them than maybe other organizations, similar Jewish or Christian organizations, maybe not so much Jewish, but Christian organizations would have accessible to them. So we see both things going on, which I think, and both are shaping how American Muslims see themselves in the United States. And I see that sort of tension between that I talked about, between sort of resistance and assimilation playing itself out productively, really productively and interestingly among American Muslims, that charitable giving is always trying to balance those things in a way that people could authentically practice Islam. And depending on individual Muslims' own political backgrounds and theological understandings, they go in different directions. They either cooperate more with the state or they resist more, and they resist the state. you.